The fictional universe of the SCP Wiki is a historic staple of online culture, and the vast compendium of writers' ideas, horrific and hilarious, have inspired many video games over time. One such video game is Secret Laboratory, the online multiplayer first-person shooter horror survival team-based whatever else it can be defined as video game developed by Northwood. This game. Secret Lab is, in my eyes, more than a good game. In terms of core gameplay, and more specifically player agency, it is unlike any other multiplayer video game I've ever experienced, and goes above and beyond simply using detailed graphics and polished sound design to be immersive. It actually uses its players as part of its core design. Greetings and welcome to Continuity Error. My name is Matt, and today we'll be diving deep into the mechanics and design of one of the best video games I've ever played. SCP Secret Laboratory. Now, before I begin my analysis, I know everyone watching probably already knows this game and some SCP lore, but for the sake of making this video accessible to everyone, here's a quick rundown of what I'm talking about. Ignore the hand gestures, I don't know what to do to make things interesting when my face is on camera. Just put the gameplay on screen. So, for those of you who don't know, SCP, that stands for the motto Secure, Contain, Protect, by the way, Secret Laboratory essentially plays out a typical SCP universe containment breach scenario. One of the facilities owned by a top-secret SCP Foundation, a global organization that protects humanity from anomalous entities, has been breached, and the various anomalies, SCPs, are breaking out. Sure, some SCPs aren't sentient, the bouncy ball that gains infinite momentum, the old hat that makes you invisible, but some are, and they are much more dangerous. The most horrifying monsters, such as the sentient artificial intelligence or the iconic moves when unseen sculpture, are playable characters that win the game if they can kill all the humans and survive, escaping containment. The Foundation, meanwhile, has its own forces prepared for this very scenario, facility guards and mobile task force soldiers who arrive later, with the objective of rescuing scientists who are studying the anomalies and recontaining the SCPs. There are also the Class D personnel, however, criminals taken from death row across the world, used as expendable slaves of the Foundation for researching and experimenting with the SCPs. They usually rebel and join the Chaos Insurgency, a Foundation rebel cell that seeks to weaponize SCPs and will fight the Foundation for control of the facility. Secret Laboratory is a bit of a complicated game, and if you want to understand all of its nuances and details, I highly recommend finding other guide videos or just reading the role-specific instructions in-game if you can play it. The game is free, but graphically intensive. If anyone is interested, I could make guides on Secret Lab basics, pro tips, SCP-specific strategies. Let me know in the comments below. Now, with all of that out of the way, you might be thinking, how can a multiplayer game be immersive? Sure, there are immersive games with multiplayer modes, but how can a multiplayer online-only game have that much immersion when you're with people who can say or do plenty of silly things that don't fit the context of the game world? Well, let me explain to you in three categories: production, writing, and above all, gameplay. How SCP Secret Laboratory creates an empowering and immersive experience not only despite random player speech and actions, but because of its nature as a multiplayer game. Secret Lab is a pretty graphically intensive game. You'll be on minimum graphics settings if you can even play on a laptop, but if you can manage it, the game looks quite impressive. There is a distinctly sci-fi but also sort of industrial look to a lot of the textures, the gritty walls and the uniforms of the MTF, the gleam and reflections of the rifles and the walls. The game feels realistic and immersive without losing its accuracy with the anomaly designs either. 173 was of course redesigned, but its new look still stands out as a grotesque monster of the original description. It's still recognizable as SCP-173. 096, 106, the 939s, all these models are unique and detailed, really adding to the fear factor, especially when you're able to see them up close. This isn't even touching on the various animations, such as the gun inspection, 106 containment, or even the hilarious explosion ragdolls found across the game. Recent updates, such as Parabellum, have also really helped Secret Laboratory's sound design, with all kinds of great music tracks and ambience adding to the eeriness of the facility, even when ear-splitting bullets are ringing, or 173's grisly tantrums are slowing the player down.
In the elevator, all of you.
Sir, yes, sir. Very good, sir. Everyone in, let's go. We are all gonna die together. Die together, brothers.
Die together. Let's all hold hands.
Hold hands, but guys, it's not gay if you say no homo. Oh, man. There are quiet moments, alone with the soundtrack, and loud moments, players yelling, trying to outrun the thumping footsteps of a squad of insurgents. With each update, less is being reused from Containment Breach, and it's all worth noting, because even small details like the click and snap of reloading enhance gameplay in ways players probably don't even notice. Secret Lab does still have some reused assets from Containment Breach, and there are a handful of sadly unused music tracks, but the ambience and existing sound effects like the ghost lights, glass shatter and howling before darkness, or the red lights and alarm blaring of the Alpha Warhead countdown are crucial elements to the game's quality. SCP is a multiplayer game and doesn't really have that much in the way of a set story. Conceptually, the SCPs and human factions are almost completely accurate to the wiki, with a few alterations for the sake of game balancing. For example, SCP-096 has a cooldown, and it is possible to survive seeing his face. But in terms of plot or characters, all we really have is timed events and players. See, while every character in the game is actually a real person playing, there is technically one NPC. Cassie, the Central Autonomic Service System for Internal Emergencies. This system will announce events that progress a round of the game, such as how long is left until decontamination in light, or when the Foundation helicopter arrives and spawns in MTF, or when an SCP is recontained, and which class is responsible. The writing for this game isn't really a gripping narrative in any traditional sense, but a setting, a prompt, a template for players to write their own story on, and that, in my eyes, does use SCP universe concepts effectively. Everything from the grotesque appearance of SCP-106 and his oily, rumbling footsteps to Cassie's dry and repetitive tone, announcing ominous and threatening things such as 106 is here. Okay, I'm gonna go for the grenade, I think. Oh.
Alpha Warhead emergency detonation sequence engaged. The underground
I don't know where they are. Oh, I have no idea where the others ended up. In a calm, emotionless state that juxtaposes the chaos and bloody horrors of the facility. That is incredibly immersive. The SCPs also have their own lore explained in inventory captions for items and F1 help screens for playable SCPs, grounding the whole game in the consistently bizarre and scary world of SCP. Players can write their own story in this game. But what do I really mean by that? Every single character, in-game, in-universe, is also a real person playing, with push-to-talk voice chat, meaning that dialogue and scenes can also be created that define the game. And I don't mean in a role-playing kind of way, although some servers certainly do that. No. Literally, every player is able to make decisions and have real conversations with real people, even if the only discussion is the in-game setting and matters. Choices and consequences here, in a way, affect real people. They lead real people to make real choices. The result is as if the game itself were real. This whole system creates a new layer of immersion on top of the gameplay factors, which I'll go into more detail about soon, that I've never really seen any other game achieve. The story of SCP Secret Lab is what you make of it, and if you play the game or watch videos of it, you will see people using the voice chat to make the game more like VR chat than Containment Breach, goofing around, negotiating and talking, rather than just taking everything seriously and playing by the book all the time, just because they can. Yeah, and now we're all gonna die. Alright, I just wanted it to be known that a guy took my card, and I blame him. You know, 939, I'm willing to team up with you, honestly. I've always been a big fan of the SCPs. Okay, yeah. And a scientist did leave. Let me just find a card here. I need to find a card. Oh, there's no 5 card. Listen. I'll let you out if you let me live, alright? Get over there. There's a scientist, he ran away. Yeah, that's right. Go get him, boy. Go get him. Oh, hell yeah, look at that. Respect it, man. Secret Lab has much greater freedoms than other multiplayer horror games, and many more players. The average Secret Lab server will have 20 to 30 players online, rather than just 6 to 12. It is more grounded than the likes of Minecraft or Roblox, which will have broader teams and objectives, as well as much higher server populations. But Secret Lab is much less linear than games such as Friday 13th or Dead by Daylight. Those games have fewer players and fewer teams whose goals never really change, just how they're achieved. Secret Lab strikes a balance between genres and breaks new ground for gaming. In terms of writing, Secret Lab has no story or characters. That's for the player to fill the void, since it's a multiplayer game. but the SCP concepts and lore that frame the template of the game are enough to make it an astonishingly unique and immersive experience. While it isn't perfect, nothing is, my adoration for the sheer complexity and quality of SCP Secret Laboratory is cemented by the core gameplay experience more than anything. Secret Lab can be an unforgiving and difficult game. You do sometimes run into toxic lobbies, and there are a few things that need buffing or nerfing slightly to improve the game balance. But the sheer complexity of all the possibilities in the game, strategies and tactics that are fully player-driven, are mind-blowing. Not only are there SCP items that do interesting things, but in tandem with the various types of weaponry, healing items, even the radios and intercom that enhance the game's push-to-talk aspect, almost all mechanics play off each other very well and connects to the wider gameplay experience in some significant way. Everything has a purpose. For example, the radio is a great way for guards to communicate where elevators are or which SCPs are present, important pieces of information in any game. But a Class D or Chaos Insurgent could also trick MTF into going to an ambush location by posing as a member of their team. There are dozens of other examples I could give about the various items, but we just don't have time for that. Point is, the basic game is pretty fun. You shoot the monsters, rescue your teammates, maybe negotiate a deal with the Class D if you need to. But mastering this game is a journey. There is so much content to explore, with different ammunition types, different weapon attachments, different hiding places, different SCP quirks, and situational strategies that, in practice, provide millions of possibilities. All of this amounts to nothing, however, until players use it. Player agency is something that there is a lot of in Secret Laboratory. For those of you who don't know, player agency means the amount of decision-making power the player has in a video game. Not just interactivity and the ability to make choices, but the ability to make meaningful choices that affect the outcome of the game. See, while the game obviously does provide the map and the items, with a degree of fair RNG in spawning, the true power of this game is player-driven randomness. Randomness created by the agency of the players. Every decision, almost every kill, every conversation, every alliance and betrayal is created by player actions. The only significant game-changing luck in SCP-SL is what players decide to do. If SCPs target facility guards at the start of the game, how much do they risk letting Class D and scientists escape? That depends on how fast they can move, and their knowledge of the game map, or good communication with SCP-079. What about the scientist in 914? Do they risk taking the time to upgrade their card all the way, so they can access everything, with bigger windows of opportunity for them to be shot by Class D or snapped by SCP-173? Or do they just grab a zone manager, head to heavy, and hope no one else got the sergeant card in 096's chamber yet? Can the SCP team survive and wipe out a fourth wave of MTF? And can the Class D hold out until Chaos spawns and adds a point for the insurgency? These scenarios are decided by minimal RNG and more by the knowledge, skill, and communication of players. Secret Lab is a strategic, tactical, and opportunistic game driven by the randomness of player choices, not a random number generation. And while noobs and trolls may do very off-the-wall things, many of these player choices are actually influenced by the game's instructions and are therefore predictable. To call most of the choices made by Secret Laboratory players random may itself be debatable, since teams always have certain fundamental objectives, regardless of the scenario. Even the things that are randomly generated are actually predictable and manageable too. The room and item generation is based on a dozen or so presets, rather than being completely procedurally generated each time, meaning experienced players will know where certain items tend to spawn. Meanwhile, events such as the arrival of the helicopter and decontamination are set. They always happen in the same places, in the same way, at the same time, so they are also fully predictable and manageable. All of this culminates into an incredibly immersive, unique, and replayable experience. Because of the sheer amount of content and choices players have to make, every game is different, especially when playing with different people. The scenarios and SFX/VFX production enhance this game's atmosphere and trademark SCP world building, but what makes Secret Laboratory a truly empowering experience, not despite but because of its multiplayer nature, is the amount of player agency present in every moment. And so, that concludes my main analysis and breakdown of how SCP Secret Laboratory uses player agency to create an immersive multiplayer game. Was your mind blown like mine was when I first realized this, or is this just some pretentious, glorified gamer nonsense? Probably Probably a bit of both, to be honest. Before we end the video, I know I've sung the praises of Secret Laboratory. It's my favourite multiplayer game ever. But it's not without issues. It's technically not perfect. I just say perfect because I think it's close enough. I think it's important and healthy to recognise the flaws in this masterpiece as well as talking about all the positives. So let's reflect on that. As I mentioned before, some lobbies can be toxic. A game that gives its players so much power, players who are often minors, angsty teens, and under 18s who don't have the best behaviour or manners, means that even on a well-moderated server, you can have unpleasant experiences in this game. Secret Lab also has some balancing issues, and while the game has had many improvements and will continue to update for the better in future, some rare situations are honestly impossible to survive or escape from. There's also moments where the game decides that you simply weren't fast enough, and the enemy team spawns and you're outnumbered 20-1. Lots of reused assets from Containment Breach still haunt the game, and there is a noticeable difference between revamped SCPs whose designs and game mechanics have been remastered, such as 173 and 096, and the SCPs who haven't gotten their updates yet, such as 049 and 939, who don't quite match the aesthetic and complexity of Scopophobia or Parabellum. Sniping is also possible in this game, meaning that players can be killed in a single shot by another human without even having a chance to spot them. But even with these, arguments can be made that these are actually fair scenarios. It takes skill and preparation to snipe, and 173 is vulnerable to large groups of armed humans who usually go up against them, as well as 096, who can be evaded with elevators. Northwood has also recently teased their next update, which will include a revamp of SCP-939. As each update brings new issues and problems, Northwood has always responded to fans and critics with good patches as well. SCP-096 used to be insanely overpowered during the original release of Scopophobia, but its additional health system has been drastically reduced, capped since. The stamina bar was balanced very finely, and gives humans a generous longevity when running away from SCPs. I think the game is doing the very best it can, and both developers and players have injected it with love and respect. Those relationships are fundamental to any video game success. And that's it, a deep dive into SCP Secret Laboratory. Thank you all so much for watching. Remember to leave a like, subscribe, and ring that bell if you did enjoy the video. Comment down below as well if you want to see more videos like this, maybe some guides on Secret Laboratory. And yeah, if you've got time, check out the links in the description too. I highly recommend joining the Discord server for notifications and discussion of continuity error videos and more. Subscribe and speculate. Are there any other multiplayer games that balance player agency as well as Secret Laboratory does?